Morning, everyone. So I'm going to be sticking a little more to script as opposed to just generally talking about things because we're halfway and I want to talk about what we've accomplished to date. And then we're going to have a robust Q&A session. And then anyone who has asked a question to date, you're going to wait in line for those that have not had a chance to ask a question. So I'll remember, I think, who you are, and let's make sure that everybody has a chance to weigh in, and then we'll conduct this in terms of the Q&A to the extent it's a meaningful conversation. I generally err on the side of taking plenty of time. When Hoosiers elected me, I made it clear that this wasn't going to be business as usual. I'm here to do one thing, get results for Hoosiers. We hit the ground running with a great team of entrepreneurial leaders that put freedom and opportunity at the center theme of what we're going to do. I've had an extremely collaborative, productive relationship with the General Assembly. We're now halfway through, and we've already secured big wins for Hoosiers. Today, I'm going to highlight a few of them. Healthcare. You've heard me talk about that. I was the loudest voice on that in D.C., along with another gentleman you know well on the Democratic side, two different approaches. The place needs to be reformed from top to bottom, and we've got a lot of action in that arena. My executive orders will bring historic reforms to our healthcare system, ensuring transparency, competition, and lower prices for Hoosiers. In the General Assembly, our freedom and opportunity healthcare reforms are moving quickly. Here are some of the biggest bills that have gotten to the halfway point. House Bill 1003, the biggest package of reforms, contains our site-neutral pricing reforms, as well as 15 other freedom and opportunity agenda items like prior authorization reform, stricter enforcement for Medicaid fraud. We should all be for that. Can't imagine the scale of it that's occurring at the other end of our federal system. Data ownership and sharing reforms, and many other reforms that will lower prices and improve outcomes for Hoosiers. House Bill 1004, which will make sure nonprofit hospitals actually act like nonprofits, do what they were originally intended to do, not amass reserves and give us high prices and poor outcomes. House Bill 1666 establishes an approval board for healthcare mergers and acquisitions and makes ownership information more transparent. We should all love transparency across the board, regardless of what it's trying to shine light on. Senate Bill 118, 340B transparency bill that reveals prescription markups. Senate Bill 140, which takes on PBMs that are driving up prescription drug prices across the board. While we're taking aggressive historic action on health care, prices, and efficiency, we're just getting started. Education, half our budget's K through 12, another 15% post-secondary support of public universities. Funding fully universal school choice, increasing funding for school safety, expand career scholarship accounts for kids with special needs, and increasing funding for education savings accounts programs. Senate Bill 146 increases minimum teacher salaries by $5,000. Bills are ensuring age-appropriate curriculum for students, reinstating A through F grades, and a suite of solutions to improve our academic achievement in math have passed as well. We just got good news recently where we're now 6th in the nation on an important parameter. So some of the stuff we've been doing is actually catching stride. We've established the Office of School Safety to keep our kids safe. Public safety, big priority for Hoosiers. Right here in our own capital city, we know it's important as well. Our agenda increases penalty for drug dealers and repeat violent offenders and sets mandatory minimum bail for repeat offenders. I just spoke at length with the Sheriff's Association earlier today, and they're on board with all of this. They feel a lot of what we've been doing on the law enforcement side has not been reinforced on the prosecution side. We're working to make sure that prosecutors who fail to apply the law are held accountable, increase funding for deputy prosecutors, and increase school safety grant funding. Hoosiers should know that we are taking a hard line against crime and drugs that destroy communities and put Hoosiers in danger. Property taxes, I'm sure there'll be a question about it. SB 1 was simply the agreement in the legislature that it was an important issue. We're at the halfway point. We've gotten the theme from them in the Senate that there's a definite interest in helping folks at each end of the spectrum. We need broader relief. And all I'm asking is for local school districts and local governments, both of which I think are the most important part of what states are about and communities are about. They need to be healthy, but they need to make sure that they've covered their legitimate costs with a reasonable growth factor and that they've not gone above and beyond. That's the wrestling match we'll have. I know numbers well. I'll be making the case to the taxpayer who I'm trying to get reset in a place that allows for the locals to be healthy, but if they bought a lot of shiny objects, they're sitting on a lot of cash balances, do a little soul searching yourselves, we'll end up at, I think, a place that's going to be a sweet, happy medium. So, property tax reform, which is that key issue, I'm going to let it there, and all I can tell you is that we're now discussing it with the House. Speaker Houston knows that he's probably going to be in, I'll call it the catbird seat, to please Hoosiers and local governments. I'm going to be out there as an advocate again to get it in that right place. So you haven't seen the end of it. It is, I would view this whole session to date along the lines of what I described it generally to be. A lot of opportunity to take a state that runs structurally well. When you look at the budget, there's not a lot of daylight between what I proposed and the House's budget. But just so we all know, robust economic growth is around 3% per year. And if you're growing anything at any level of government by more than that, you're growing government at the expense of the taxpayer. And to put that into context, over the last biennium, we've averaged about 10% growth rates, 22 to 23, 23 to 24. You keep doing that, you're running like the federal government. The difference is they got a printing press in the basement. We don't. We got a constitutional amendment that says we got to balance it. And we got to make sure that you don't confuse our normal economic growth with the large S that came from the federal government, by the way, that was 100% borrowed. So you can't start running, no government can, based upon that had big impact on budgets over the last 2 years. So these bold ideas, all the things that we're doing, we're halfway through. The agenda, I am pleased, is, first of all, everyone's listening to what I ran on. The freedom and opportunity agenda is ringing well across the board, and we did hit the ground running. We've made great progress on the Hoosier Workforce Upskill Tax Credit to give employers a financial incentive to upskill their employees. Back when I was here 10 years ago, we were acknowledging that if we get workforce development done correctly, you could fill 65,000 jobs that pay more than most college degrees would generate. Sadly, through COVID, that's now 130,000. So if we get workforce development, get that mostly done when kids are in high school, we can add $3 to $4 billion to our state economy, and it would be by far the biggest economic development thing that we could do. So I want to work hard to make sure that we get that balance, since we're K through 12's half, post-secondary is another 15. that balance between sending kids towards a 4-year degree where 50% of them don't complete it, they end up wasting time and money. We need to make sure that we're guiding them into degrees that have markets here in Indiana, and then we finally resolve how we get to a better place in workforce development. First 5 minutes of any second half in basketball, which I love, played it many years ago, I'll use that analogy. And we're not coming from a place that is really in bad shape, other than we've gotten used to budgets that have grown 3 times the level that we can sustain them into the future. We will get there. I'm listening again to the people that got me here, Hoosiers in general. Just as I was speaking to the sheriffs earlier today, I invited all them. You're the rank and file. You've got leaders that I've said, listen, get me information that helps us run this state better. I'm doing that across this newly organized state government, which lends itself to getting good ideas from the trenches where they normally come to where we fix things in a better way for all Hoosiers down the road. Now I'll take the first question from someone who has not been able to ask one before. Go ahead.
So I want to talk about, what are your thoughts on the efforts to share property tax revenue from traditional schools with charter schools, and how do you think that will affect where Senate Bill 1 lands, or landing where you want?
So that idea on education, number one, has got to be founded upon the principle of parents being in the driver's seat. They should have full flexibility to decide how they want their kids educated. And when it comes to sharing resources, if that should be available to anyone that is providing that option to parents. And I think on the other hand, you got to make sure that you're measuring results. So my feeling is you should share those resources. In many places, the charters are the only option. And that's in rural counties as well as many of the places where we got to figure out how we make the traditional public system healthier. But the only way you do it is you do it through competition and choice, not continuing a one option only. So I think those resources ought to be shared, and we'll find the resources to do it. And we've not taken anything away from public education. We've committed that it's the most important thing we do in our budget. So I'm going to be interested in making sure that everyone gets resourced. That's how you get to a better place. Go ahead.
Governor Braun, last week you mentioned that a number of House Republican leaders, Speaker Houston included, the House Ways and Means Chair, they say that what's going on at the federal level with DOGE could affect what's going on with the state budget. In fact, Speaker Houston is talking to members of our congressional delegation to give Indiana a runway should DOGE cuts impact the budget. What are your thoughts about that now?
That's an easy one for me. I was on the budget committee in the Senate for 6 years. We never did a budget. We couldn't even agree to a top line. And whenever I ask any Hoosier, and I'm saying all of you would agree with this, if you knew that every dollar of a new federal program now is 100% borrowed, you'd probably think differently in terms of, is it a good idea? Or should you figure out how not to be there? 30 cents on everything we spend is coming from borrowed money. So when you see Elon up there with a chainsaw, it looked like it was fabricated. I've never seen one that shiny. It's trying to make a point. And in that place, it was frustrating because there were 2 or 3 of us that no finance, no macroeconomics, and no one was paying attention. And you know what happened in the 6 years I was there? We added another $18 trillion to the backs of our kids and grandkids to pay it off. So when you get used to something, when you're not really having any skin in the game, other than getting the largesse of it, it's a lot of what had to do with our budgets jumping 10% over the last biennium each year. So they're going to find a lot of good stuff. Obviously, it's going to shake that system. Here, we're in structurally good shape. We balance our budgets because we have to constitutionally. You don't have the printing press in the basement. So they are going to have pushback from the whole system, even the ones that may not even show up for work that like the current structure of it. Here, we've got the benefit of being able to take a surgical approach. I'm asking all agencies to find common sense things that make it work better. We never got used to, hopefully, having borrowed money that you can't sustain year after year being part of what we do. So it's a much different dynamic. It's programs that we've become too dependent on, yes, we may have to scramble to see if they're good of how we do it on our own accord. That place is going to change one way or the other. This is just the opening salvo. And if they do fail, I can tell you the numbers will fix them in the long run. State governments are in a different dynamic, and I'm pleased to say that we've been good stewards ever since Mitch Daniels got here, to where we've been basically not getting too ahead of our skis, other than 22 to 23, 23 to 24, and we're going to be okay transitioning through that. Yes. Everybody, you've asked me a question before. Anybody else want to jump in? Go ahead. And we'll come back. Yeah.
So state government leaders will have to take some kind of action regarding Indianapolis's pursuit of an MLS bid.
Yeah.
And the commissioner is in town. Have you met with him?
He was in town yesterday because I talked to him.
What was that conversation like? And is there anything you're expecting?
I mean, we're the sports capital of the country. Soccer is a sport that, I coached it for all four of my kids. Even though I was a football player, I learned it. It is a great sport. We got a great minor league team. They're starting to fill up in terms of league capacity. I would think we ought to figure out how to accommodate it because we're a great sports town. It's at the very early part of the conversation. It'll take a huge investment on a part of a local enterprise or entrepreneur. And finance is my cup of tea. I did it the old-fashioned way by reinvesting every penny over 37 years and know how to manage it. And I know when you need to stick your neck out for something that we surely would want to be a part of. And beyond that, I can tell you that that first meeting was yesterday, and I think we'd regret it if we don't find a way to bring MLS to Indianapolis.
Is there anything you're directing the state budget committee or state lawmakers?
No, because it's too early. We're just having the discussions on how much you need, whether you could need a new facility, whether you got to build or can do something with an existing. And it looks like that's fairly easy because 26 out of the 27 most recent have had, because it's so popular and you can use it for other reasons. I want to make sure that cash flows. That's going to be easy for us to look at. I just view it as an opportunity that may not be around if we aren't actively involved. Yeah. Anybody else want to ask a question that hasn't done it before? If not, I'll go to you and then you next. Go ahead.
Going back to D.C., lawmakers there are talking about federal cuts to Medicaid spending.
Yes.
Which would shift some of the responsibility back here to pay for some of those services. So what do you say to Hoosiers who are concerned that they could be losing some of those needed services?
I mean, I'm a believer that health care should be available to everyone. In a country like ours, and the problem, the reason it isn't, is it costs twice as much almost as what it does for other countries. So the way that we make Medicaid easier and more broadly available is make sure there's no fraud in it, and that all the people that are supposed to be on it are on it, not others. But we got to lower healthcare costs, mostly from hospitals, because they are now 50% of the healthcare budget. And even in a state like Indiana, IU Health, our largest provider, is now paid by the federal government through Medicaid and Medicare, to where it's 56% of their revenues. So we're slowly going that way. And then you've got the private side that's been financing an unhealthy healthcare system. If we get it right in the long run, insurance companies and hospitals are going to have to be entrepreneurial, and there are going to be many governors like me. I fixed it in my own business. I've referred to it can be done, but to do it broadly, they're going to have to start running their operations more efficiently. Then you make Medicaid less expensive, Medicare, and if you want to maintain the private side, which is increasingly feeling the burden that they're having to reimburse at rates 200 to 300% and sometimes more than what Medicaid and Medicare do, we've got a problem that sooner or later will collapse. Got to bring healthcare costs down through transparency and competition. That's how we get to it. In the meantime, if the industry doesn't make things less expensive, you're going to find the federal government is going to become a heavier business partner since they're paying most of the bills anyway. And I think the healthcare industry will regret it. It's gradually going that way. So when you want to look at the specifics, we'll do everything we can to run our side of Medicaid more efficiently, make sure the people that need it are covered, and make sure that there's no fraud in the system. And there's a lot of it at the federal level, and we've got a decent amount of it at the state level. Go ahead.
You talked about, you say you know numbers well, the governor's veto can be overridden by a simple majority in the legislature. Is a veto threat very likely? Could you elaborate that a little bit?
That's not a very nice number, is it? So, of course, if you do veto something here, it would have to be for the impact, especially if it was by a narrow margin. Most of what I think you're going to see in this administration is there's been more collaboration with the legislature than we've seen in a long, long time. They're coming to see me at the residence. We're having meetings with everyone in here. We'll get to a point where we'll find out that solution on SB 1. And if not, as a last resort, I'm listening to the people. I know how to use the microphone. I think I'm going to be in a spot to where I size up what Hoosiers think is reasonable. And I'll use those as a last resort. I don't expect to, because if you're collaborative, and especially when you're trying to do something difficult that's gotten out of hand over 3 to 4 years, that's not easy. I've also been very public about school districts being healthy and local governments. And when you come from the entrepreneurial world, it's a different dynamic than the way government normally works. But I've never found anything that's difficult if you're not talking to your partners about how to get there. So I feel good at the halfway point. House is now looking at it, that we'll be in good shape there. But if it does come to where we don't get there, even though it doesn't, it depends on what that end product would pass with what type of margin, I'm not going to be afraid to use any of the tools that I have here as governor of Indiana.
So you're hoping not to veto, but you will if necessary.
I'd say you've got it summed up pretty well. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I know you had signed a legislation, or you had signed to ban DEI from
Yes.
state agencies. And I'm also curious, there's also a bill that's coming up that through Senate that is looking at taking out DEI in state schools. Now, how do you respond to people who are saying that this is regressive?
Yes. Tell you how is it was a couple weeks ago, had a large group of black pastors and educators that I spoke to. They came in, did not schedule the meeting. That was fine with me. Pledged that we'd have a discussion. I think they were afraid that it may be months down the road. That was on a Wednesday. We did it the next Monday. Martin University came up, had a great conversation with the president of the university. They're really focusing on workforce development. I think that focus there is a wonderful kind of emphasis on what we need done better. And so I'm going to work on everything I've heard there. And when we look at MEI as opposed to DEI, it basically boils down to a discussion on what do you mean by merit. Well, I think we all know what's meant by merit. We want the best folks in office or doing something based upon their ideas and what they're bringing to the table. And I'm very aware of how many have struggled to date. So when it comes to equity versus equality, to me, that's simple. If you're focusing too much on equity, you're contriving outcomes through government. You can see where that's falling apart, even constitutionally. We've heard from the Supreme Court on it, but that doesn't mean we can't amalgamate it into a place that pretty well is going to address all of it. But when it comes down to it, it's going to have to be merit and make sure there are no vestiges of discrimination and bigotry and all the stuff that used to underlie while folks from across the spectrum weren't feeling like they were seeing opportunity. We'll get there. I'm already discussing that with the stakeholders that raised that early concern. And it won't be a one-off discussion. I'll be involved in that until we get to that right point.
Last question.
Okay? I'll take 2 more questions when she says last. Go ahead.
To follow up on Abdul's question, between the veto threat, which you say is
Yeah.
but between that and digital ads targeting lawmakers over property tax reform, how concerned are you that you're risking spoiling some of these relationships?
So I would say when you look at media, when they're getting involved, or groups that want to make a point of view, especially when you're trying to work it out with folks that would take umbrage at that, that's called running a campaign. You know, I did that under that microscope for, 2 years and becoming your next governor. So you're going to have to be careful there. You have a lot of ads out there, and even the other side, they come at you, with stuff that you'd probably rather not hear. Healthy conversation, even when it pushes you the wrong direction or might push the folks that you're wanting engaged in the conversation in a way, I'd say don't go overboard with it. But if it's information that needs to be out there, hopefully it's uncomfortable only because it's addressing something that needs to be changed in a positive way. So it's part of the process. To me, it's like many things. Do it in moderation. It could be helpful. If that's your only approach, it'll probably be unproductive. Last question. Go ahead.
Just wanted to ask, so we've removed funding for the statewide literacy program, but your budget didn't include about $1 million a year for a Christmas pregnancy group and about $350,000 a year for a motherhood group that doesn't really have that many accomplishments. Could you just talk a little bit about that?
So when it comes to that, I'd have to say that generated more conversation in a short period of time than anything maybe other than property taxes. But that was part of a process that I've treated everyone the same way. It's part of the idea of zero-based budgeting, where you come back and make your case. And we're not there. We're on pseudo zero-based budgeting. And that was one of them, obviously, that was well received. Didn't see where it had any real negatives to it, but it was part of our budget that went up 10%, 22 to 23, 23 to 24. And the discussion was loud and quick. And when you're engaging your wife to make sure that you find sources to make sure we keep that in play, I'm going to do that on anything if we can get the private sector to be the main funder of stuff, because we got a lot of other things, infrastructure, education, healthcare, that we have to do through state government. So that is part of the process, and it's like anything. I said I want input. I want to hear. And I'd say it was part and parcel of that, and we'll make sure that that stays in place because it's done a good job. But don't think that that had any intentional aiming at it, and it's the way it should work. Thank you so much. Great questions. We'll do this again soon.